The Crypto Markets Update is brought to you by KuCoin, the best place to find the next crypto gem.
It's a terrible day in the markets, and joining us now to discuss is Sylvia Jablonski. She's CEO, CIO, and co-founder of Defiance ETFs. Welcome, Sylvia.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to see you.
Great seeing you. This, of course, is a terrible day for a lot of people, as I just said, who are long crypto, who are particularly long Bitcoin. Can you just kind of spell it out here? Why did Bitcoin exactly fall as much as it did, given that the crisis seemed to center around FTX? Is it that there is a concern that FTX would need to eventually, or somebody will need to sell all that Bitcoin to shore up FTX's situation? Or was there actually a sale going on by FTX and Alameda, et cetera, to do anything? Do we know anything in that regard?
Yeah, so it's hard to sort of pinpoint what the exact reason is. I think it's probably a combination of all of those things. I think it's partially Alameda. I think it's partially this idea that, large amounts of Bitcoin will have to be sold based on what's happening between the two companies. But I also think that there's a contagion type of story here. So it's really interesting. For the first time in the last 2 days, I was looking at the correlations of Bitcoin to some of the growth stocks. And for the first time, they sort of behaved differently. They had been kind of trading in lockstep with growth and risky assets. And for the first time, they kind of meandered off. And I think what happened was that, like a lot of the news we're getting in equity markets, any kind of, sense or scent of bad news or, kind of a potential collapse sends investors running to the hills now. So I think if you had investors that, were sort of long a lot of the different cryptocurrencies out there, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, Polkadot, any of these types of names, the more popular names, and they sort of heard this. I think the gut reaction was sort of to sell because there could be this massive issue in the system. So a lot of times what I find is investors who are not sort of well-versed on the differences between blockchain and the different cryptocurrencies and, the different platforms and firms and mining and things like that, they just kind of lump it all into crypto, right? So FTX is crypto, Binance is crypto, Coinbase is crypto. And so, then you sort of see that happening. I think what needs to sort of change is that we see this issue kind of come to fruition. The two companies merge and everything is sort of okay in terms of the stability of the cryptocurrency itself. But what I will say is that, Sam Bankman-Fried was very much the sort of Jamie Dimon of crypto for a long time. I think, people kind of thought that this firm was like the JP Morgan and then sort of the most stable and things like that. So when you see a major player, on what feels like the verge of collapse, it just kind of destroys the confidence of investors, and you just see these panic sales. And then, of course, 7% down today, 11% down yesterday.
Do you think that his role just a couple of months ago as somebody as almost the buyer of last resort, as the guy who was going to bail him out, if not J.P. Morgan, J. Boychick Morgan, if you will, just going out there and looking at Voyager and looking at everything. Now with him out of the picture, do you think that actually makes the contagion aspect to it even worse, because you have a lot of funds and a lot of exchanges with a lot of leverage positions all of a sudden without somebody to back them up? Do you think that actually is going to create kind of a long-term wet blanket effect on the rest of the market?
Well, I think what would be really interesting in this scenario, and that's a great point. I definitely think that it does increase that further contagion. But I kind of had this thought yesterday that this happening in a sense is probably good for a company like Coinbase that is sort of publicly traded, transparent. They have their own issues and things like that, but they're sort of stable, right? And the tax issues are known, and holdings issues and trading, mannerisms and operations and things like that are all kind of clear. So I think that gives institutions anyway, a second thought to maybe trade there. And then you have all of these companies out there, like BlackRock is getting big into the space. BlackRock could end up being that company that buys all of this stuff up if they continue to invest there. So I think that this is going to open a lot of really interesting partnerships in the future. And that, by the way, could be the rally, right? If you get one of these classic sleepier Wall Street groups coming to save it.
That's assuming they'd want to jump in when prices are at 18. I mean, why not just wait till they're at 10 or 5?
Yeah, and they probably will, right? So I think in the meantime, you get this range-bound volatility in the asset class, and it's almost a similar thing with equities, right? So many of the top tech darlings have fallen 40 to 50% from their 52-week highs, and a lot of investors that still really believe in those spaces and think that the next decade has a lot of room for growth, they dollar cost average in, and I suspect you're going to see some of that with crypto as well, right? I mean, if people liked crypto at 50,000, why don't they like it at 17,000? This issue will sort of resolve itself at some stage, right? And then it opens up a buying opportunity. But there's enough volatility there, I think, to have people kind of hang out on the sidelines until this shakes out between the two firms.
Well, there's sort of two separate issues here, right? One is the potential contagion effect, and then the other is just market sentiment, where people are like, oh, crypto is a disaster, I don't want any part of this, right? So these are two, negative trends that could push prices down. So just, with the obvious disclaimer that nobody has a crystal ball, I mean, are we just sort of at the beginning of a downward price trend? I mean, or do we have a long way to go down, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think, it's sort of hard to predict, but I think just, sort of judging by what happened over the last 2 days, I suspect that we at least have a couple more weeks of this until, we kind of see how this issue shakes out. And, to the point that was discussed before, is there a whole lot of Bitcoin that sort of needs to be sold in coming days to, make investors whole? And how does that play out, right? How are institutions that had a lot of exposure to these various coins and also Bitcoin through the platform, how does that play out? Are there sales that we sort of don't know about happening? So I think, until we get clarity and transparency on how much there is left to do in terms of, cryptocurrency sales themselves, I think we'll have potentially downward price pressure on major crypto currencies.
And because Sam Bankman-Fried was this J.P. Morgan figure, or at least regarded as such, let's talk a bit more about the contagion effect, because they were in deals of potentially acquiring Robinhood, as well as Voyager assets, bailing out BlockFi, et cetera. And Sam Bankman-Fried backed coins such as Solana is also taking a hit right now down over 33%. ETH also down. They have a lot invested in DeFi through the Seer project. So do you see those projects also, taking a further hit, going further down, and bottom? When do we see the bottom for that?
Yeah, I think, it'll depend on what happens with this deal, right? So I read that CZ is a big fan of BNB chain over Solana. So then, you kind of see, a bit of a treacherous situation with that particular cryptocurrency. But I think it just, kind of remains to be seen on this one. Again, I think it depends on how much crypto on the books has to be offloaded as a consequence of what's going on. With sort of this merger and making investors whole.
So what price do you think we're going to see next? Is it going to be 10,000 or 40,000 in Bitcoin?
Oh, tough one. If you asked me this a couple of weeks ago, I'd say 40, but I think, 10 is more likely than 40. I think that, we'll probably balance out at around 15 for the next sort of technical level, and perhaps we don't go any further than that if there's a resolution that appeases the markets here.